Spare is a player who's been in the community for a very long time, and he's proven himself to have some impressive skills across many areas of play, with his top plays being split between hard rock streams and DT jump maps. He's also monetized his success as a player, with multiple sponsored streams from games like Raid Shadow Legends. But could this all just be a ruse? A player who uses hacks to get viewers, which brings sponsors, which make him more money, stealing from those who support him most. It's a theory that's become fairly popular recently, especially on Reddit. But how could a player who regularly streams and has over 2,000 hours in the game be a cheater? Let's take a look. Let's begin with Spare's, let's just say, not immaculate history. He began playing in December of 2012, and by late 2013 he was already one of the best UK players, which was great for him. He improved quickly, but not entirely unreasonably, and everything seemed to be going pretty well. But at the end of the year, out of the blue, he got banned. This would be the end of many players' OSU careers because it supports fairly strict ban policy, with even a player as determined as Whitecat staying banned for 3 years. But for Spare, it was different, because although it's really hard to track down much about him from before 2016, in his report thread from 2016 it was mentioned that he was banned a total of 4 times. Which is pretty insane, but he was unbanned each time, and by the start of 2016 he was a free player, and one that was seemingly free of the allegations against him. But it wasn't quite over just yet, because the way Spare was unbanned rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. It was mostly that people thought he should be banned permanently because of the multiple offenses he had. And he'd even admitted to hacking in what I assume is an apology to the OSU staff in an attempt to get unbanned in mid-2015.
My OSU career went downhill after I decided to take the path of cheating, something which I'm not proud of to say and which I am ashamed of.
Which only made people dislike him more. But all of the things alleged against him had happened between 2013 and 2015, and it seemed like before he began hacking, he was already a skilled player. And maybe with this attempt to grow as a person, he could improve and become the player that his hacks made him before. But in 2016, someone brought up something that sort of put this into jeopardy, that his claim of offline play was false.
And an idiot just like me, who has been playing offline for nearly 1 year and a half.
Because there were multiple times when he played on stream with other accounts, and it put into question whether any of the things he said were true. But it wasn't quite as concrete as it may seem, because both accounts were banned, meaning that the support staff already knew of their existence, making it more likely that he'd already had the accounts during one of his previous 4 bans, which would also make more sense with the ban policy. But still, playing on banned multi-accounts while having your main account restricted for suspected hacking is not a good look. Along with this, there was also another OSU report thread, which claimed that he had blatant relax hacks. But the evidence was a single play in which Spare got an 100% on a 6-star, so it really didn't end up going anywhere. But only a few months after that, there was a much more convincing take. The post claimed that Spare had aim assistance, which is just what it sounds like. It helps your cursor make it onto objects that you would have misaimed, and it's much harder to spot than relax hacks. So let's go through some of the claims made against him. In terms of aim correcting, it seems that they didn't find anything exceptionally obvious, but there are a couple things they mentioned. On this slider, he over-aimed at first, and then came back to almost the exact center of the circle, which, while it's uncommon for legit players, it definitely still happens. Here's a clip of Idke doing the same thing. There are a couple more instances of similar things happening, which are all just a bit suspicious, but most of them are the result of overanalyzing, and so don't hold much value. And there are even a few parts which seem to hint at his legitimacy, like this cursor skip, which happens when you hover too high. Here is another clip of Idke doing that. Then there's this pentagon, which apparently has aim slowdown, but it mostly just looks like someone shaking while hitting an uncomfortable pattern. But even though the post went through a lot of questionable moments in his play, most of them weren't super obvious, and without looking for hacks, they almost certainly would have been seen as completely normal play. But towards the end of the map, there are a couple spots which are much more suspicious, with this one looking very odd because of the sudden change of velocity. A velocity which kept almost perfectly consistent. But I would say that even with that, it's pretty hard to be convinced by this. And support seemed to agree, because he stayed unbanned. And although this is fairly reasonable, because people already had the impression that support favored him, he gained even more dislike. This was combined with the finding of a multi-account that, unlike before, was still unrestricted. According to OSU's ban policy, this meant that he almost certainly should have been banned. But support let him stay, and this account still isn't banned to this day, even though with only 31 hours played, it got multiple 200s. And you can see that it stopped playing right after he was unbanned. And so, Spare wasn't in the best standing among a fair few players. But so far, everything brought up has been between 2013 and 2015. Maybe, finally, in 2016, he would be able to prove his legitimacy and become a top player. Which, he did to a fair extent. There was one minor debacle, where his Road of Resistance play was put into question because of its strange aim, And it actually would have been fairly convincing, except for the fact that it was done at LAN with other top UK players, and all the people who had tried his computer said it felt completely fine. This was actually really good for his reputation, because it showed that even seemingly solid pieces of evidence could be wrong. And with this, Spare's long cheating saga seemed to finally come to an end. Spare played a lot over the next few years, and he improved like it. He began setting pretty impressive scores soon after, not just on DT maps, but also on stream maps. Notably, he got FCs on Honesty and Sidetrack Day, and almost Uda. His top plays seemed to trade between DT maps and streams. And by the end of 2019, he even had an FC on Songs Comp worth almost 800 PP because of his good accuracy. This was followed with a Snow Halation FC worth 830 PP. He streamed almost all of this, and it seemed like almost everyone had dropped their suspicion about him. But, even though it was going pretty well, he decided to take a break. It's a fairly common occurrence, but as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, it began to seem less like a break, and more like an all-out departure from the game. And especially by April of 2020, when he hadn't been playing for 5 months, you wouldn't really be blamed for thinking that he might have just outright quit. But, what he's done more recently tells a very different story. On April 21st, Spare came back with a bang, setting his new top play on Sunglow, and multiple impressive 700s. All of this made it seem a lot more likely that he played offline during his break, and he'd improved because of it, since a Sunglow FC would have been near impossible before his break. But, since it was just barely above his skill range before, it seemed fairly reasonable that he'd be able to FC it now. And because almost certainly legitimate players like Whitecat have done it before, it didn't seem all that suspicious, and not too many questions were raised. Because of this, his streams also immediately began to gain a fair bit of notoriety. But nothing crazy. And if he had kept up DT plays like this, he likely would have stayed fairly relevant and kept away from suspicion. But that's not what he did. Because in May of 2020, he began to set some really unexpected scores on stream maps. It started with a No-Mod FC on Road of Resistance, which fits his skill set well enough. Then he followed that with a Cry Thunder Hard Rock FC that nearly beat Idke's accuracy, and shortly after this, he also got a sponsor, mostly because of his increased viewership. And although all of this is great, because of its insanity, this score raised a lot more questions, most of which were expressed by this OSU report thread. So let's go through it. There are a lot of people who've already made up their minds on this case, but instead of trying to push a certain narrative, let's look at each claim objectively and see if anything stands out. The post is once again about aim assist. So first, what does aim assist look like? Well, it's usually characterized by weirdly perfect snaps and a lack of flow on jumps. It also has very sudden velocity changes right after sliders complete. So now onto the plays which this post claims use aim assist, starting with his tool-assisted speed core play, which has this video exposing it. The video goes through a couple moments which are pretty easy to pass off as normal.
You can still kind of see it, I think. Pretty crazy at the end here, so let's just take a look here. You can see how his cursor is just zooming off. Even right there. Right there was like a weird issue going on.
But there are also a few that come off as much more convincing. Especially with this one, where his cursor goes off the slider and it changes both direction and speed at the exact same time, in a very similar way to the aim assist. This is honestly the most convincing thing yet, but it still isn't conclusive in any way. The video goes through a few more minorly suspicious things, but one stands out. This snap, which, while it certainly could have happened normally, it was still a little bit odd, and it was something that showed up in the aim-assisted plays. He then goes through his Cry Thunder play, which contains a lot less aiming evidence, but there were a few similar aim speed changes, and one part where he snaps to each circle of a stream, but it only happens once, and it could just be some shaking. And then there's the big one, his play on Ongreifer with Hard Rock. It was an entirely unique score, and it beat Idke's accuracy and combo with Hard Rock, and it even beat Whitecat's accuracy with Hidden Only. It was really the play that cemented Spare as one of the best Hard Rock players ever. That is, if it was done legitimately, because this specific play was really the one that the report was targeting. So let's take a look. First, on the jumps, where Spare is exceptionally snappy, in a way that does look very reminiscent of aim assist, but this can be explained away with his hovering, which can often cause very snappy aim. And then there's the streams. Streams are meant to be flowed through with a player like Idke having almost perfect cursor control so that it can move at the correct speed for a stream. And this is where Spare's play begins to look less like a legit player with some strange moments, and more like somebody obviously using aim assist. Because on the streams, his aim looks like this. He snaps to objects in a stream, which is already a bit odd, but it can be explained away with the shake that hovering can cause. What really stands out is how he slows down to hit individual notes of a stream. because it's something that almost no one else does, and it's something that's near impossible. When looking at a stream gameplay, it's much closer to what a normal player looks like when jumping rather than streaming. And with that, the thread is over. It has a lot of evidence, some for and some against him, and I think it's enough to come to some sort of consensus. So let's do that. When I started this video, I honestly wasn't really sure what to believe, because on one hand, seeing Spare pop off with Hard Rock was awesome, especially since so many of the best Hard Rock players have recently been playing a lot less, and it seemed like he could be the one to finally bring it back. But on the other hand, it also sort of rubbed me and a lot of other people the wrong way to see him constantly doing sponsored streams and other things that just seemed a bit greedy. I think this dislike of sponsored streams and his history of cheating was what spurred this investigation, which is honestly a much better start than the Vaxay or Whitecat situation, where people suspected them of cheating because they were just too good. And this report thread was very well made, but there are also a few things to take into consideration. First, it's very difficult to use aim assist with a tablet, because the tablet will constantly try and override it. It can still be done, but it takes a lot of work. Second, in all of these clips, Spare hovers, and because of this, he'd be much more prone to both shaky aim and suspicious jump flicks, both of which were highlighted as evidence in the thread. Third, at a high enough level, top players can look like they have external help, because cheats are meant to make you better, and so if you're actually that good, it can look exceptionally similar. And finally, the maker of this post used hacks to make it, and he's done a lot of shady things in the past. These videos also have comments and likes disabled, making it seem like the creator might have been a little bit insecure about even his own conclusions. But even after taking these things into account, it's hard to make much of a case for Spare, because although some of the clips have certainly been overanalyzed and don't hold much value, many of the clips still can't be explained even with all the very generous conditions laid out, like his strange acceleration at the end of sliders, or his ability to slow down to hit individual notes of a stream. He also immediately stopped playing Hard Rock after this post was made, and right now, over a month after this report, he still hasn't touched Hard Rock streams. He continues to do sponsored streams though, and I would say that in its current state, this case certainly points to Spare having hacks. But I think that if Spare would either play Hard Rock and stream again, or make a proof video, he could easily disprove everything as coincidence, something which anyone with more obvious cheats would have a harder time with. His break before setting the insane scores could explain this level of improvement, but it can't explain his aim quite as well. His streams could be a way of proving his legitimacy if he was suspected of time warping or replay editing, but in the case of aim assist, it's certainly possible to do it on stream without anyone noticing. And overall, because of his strange gameplay and his even stranger response, it's hard not to be suspicious. Spare clearly does have skills as a player, and his DT plays are pretty likely to be legit. It's just that his sudden switch to Hard Rock and his suspicious stream aim make it hard to say for sure that he's legit. And even though preferences change, playing almost exclusively Hard Rock for a few weeks and then after people become suspicious, completely refusing to play the mod is a completely backwards approach. If you're legit, why not at least try and disprove the claims against you? When Whitecat was suspected of cheating, he recreated the play in his Proof I'm Legit video. When Vaxay was suspected of cheating Airman, he made a video recreating the play with his whole body in frame to make it obvious that it wasn't sped up. But in Spare's case, he's done the opposite, which makes it seem like he really isn't confident in his own skills or legitimacy. And as his case is really up for debate until that happens, it seems like he should just get it over with and prove himself. Honestly, his case is one of the most interesting and divisive things at the community in a long time. And I'm really hoping that we'll eventually get a conclusion, either in the form of a ban or a convincing proof video. But for now, it's up in the air. Spare has most certainly created an almost unprecedented divide in the community, with his questionable history and even more questionable present, which likely won't be matched for a long time. And I think that's pretty fascinating.